You're listening to Mammal Watching with Charles Foley and John Hall. You can find other episodes at mammalwatching.com/podcast.
Welcome to the Mammal Watching podcast with me, John Hall in New York City.
And me, Charles Foley in Minneapolis. John, welcome back. I know that you have recently returned from a trip to Mexico where you found a very highly sought after mammal species. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, Charles. I had a nice time down in Baja, California, which is in Mexico, confusingly enough. And I actually met up with Claudia Diaz, who's one half of Wild About Colombia, who some people will know and have traveled with, because she was telling me that this time of year, which is sort of late May through July, is a really good time to see kogia, or the dwarf and pygmy sperm whales in the Sea of Cortez, the Gulf of California. And it's a new family of mammals for me. One of the only families of cetaceans I haven't seen. And it's a small, I think fairly widespread and fairly common, judging by the number of strandings, cetacean. They're only about 7, 8 foot long, a couple of meters, 2, 3 meters long. But they're very, very hard to see because they tend not to do anything. They float to the surface for a while and then they sort of disappear at the first sign of people. So I was a little bit sort of nervous about this trip and whether the weather would be okay and whether we'd see one. And lo and behold, we did. In fact, we saw one 7 minutes after leaving the shore, which was extraordinary. Even our boat driver was impressed with that. We went out of a place called La Ventana in the south of Baja, quite near Cabo, La Paz. And yeah, we saw a group of 3 within 7 minutes. And it was a bit of an anticlimax, to be honest. I was still turning on my camera and he just stopped the boat and go, there they are. And I'd hoped we'd have to look a little bit harder than this. But we saw about 10 that day, and the next day conditions weren't quite as perfect, and we saw another 3 in the few hours we were out there. So it's a great spot for them. And it's the only place I've ever heard where they're that abundant, it seems. So if anyone wants to see kogia, it was mainly the dwarf sperm whales there, the commoner one we saw, Kogia sima. That's the place. They have got the other one there, the pygmy, which seems even shyer and rarer, but they are there occasionally. And the only sort of story is about how shy these animals are. We couldn't really get more than 200 or 300 meters from them at the closest because they just sink. And we're in a very small boat, and we saw one that was about 300 meters away, and we stopped. And I was fumbling with my camera, and I dropped my binoculars on the floor of this little wooden panga, little wooden speedboat thing, and the whale just sank straight away. Just the noise from binoculars from that distance, and the captain reckoned it had heard the vibrations. So they are very shy little things. And then after going in the south of the Baja, I went up to the north to join Todd Pusser, Bob Pittman, from the podcast as part of this year's Vaquita research. I'm not allowed to talk about that, but we are going to have an episode quite soon where we can talk about what happened and the story, I hope, of that fascinating, very, very sad story about that animal's plight and the conservation of it. So yeah, it was a very interesting and productive few days.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Sounds quite incredible. And with the kogia, did tin boat captains say that they would see them fairly often? What's the story? Are they seasonal?
Yeah, I think they're there year round, but I think it's the weather that's the problem. So this is a big kite surfing place. Right. So there's a lot of wind through the winter, and then the hurricanes start in August. But sort of late May or mid-May through July, mid-August, he wasn't surprised we've seen that many. He obviously knew them, pointed them out. And the reason Claudia sort of suggested was she was a marine mammal guide down there for many years, and she knew they were common. So it wasn't a fluke. They are there all the time, but just difficult to see unless you have flat, calm days.
Right. Yeah. Well, 7 minutes. That's good.
That's
even
right.
For your lucky streak, John.
This lucky thing we keep talking about, the words were ringing in my ears when I saw them that quickly. And I thought, Foley isn't going to believe this.
Foley got a text about 30 seconds later. So.
He did, yeah. First person I told.
Well, our guest today is Bradley Trevor Greive, also known as BTG. He is best known for his work as an author and became a household name after writing the Blue Day book in 2000. He has since gone on to become one of the world's most successful humor authors, and his books have sold more than 30 million copies Yes, you heard that right. That's 30 million copies in 29 languages across 115 countries. BTG has also worked as a cartoonist, a radio personality, has hosted wildlife programs on Animal Planet, has had one of his books called Penguin Bloom made into a major Netflix movie, and he even has his own Netflix series called Adventure Beast. In his latest film venture, he's the expert co-host on the new wildlife documentary called Queer Planet about sexual diversity in nature, which starts streaming tomorrow night, that is June 6th, on Peacock. He's an internationally respected wildlife expert who leads, advises, and funds conservation programs around the globe and conducted 6 years of fieldwork in Southeast Alaska studying brown bears. If that wasn't enough, BTG also completed the Russian Cosmonaut Training Program in 2004 and was the Polynesian rock lifting champion in 2006. In 2014, he was awarded the Order of Australia for his services to literature and wildlife conservation. And that's only part of his resume. So I came across BTG at a recent conservation conference where he was the main guest speaker. And during his talk, he gave a nice shout out to John and I about the Mammal Watching podcast. So naturally, for his sins, we invited him to be a guest on the program. BTG, welcome to the Mammal Watching podcast. It's so good to have you here.
It's my pleasure, gentlemen. And just to clarify two things to just get it out of the way, I didn't give a shout out to John. I didn't know he existed. It was just to you, Charles. So let's just keep the love where it needs to be. In addition to all my accomplishments, I do smell like freshly baked bread.
Well, it's also very exciting for me to meet you. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I'm really looking forward to this chat.
Me too. Genuinely enjoy talking to other zoo nerds, and both of you are as passionate as I am and have similar expat origin stories. So it's just, I love how it's brought us all together around the world to live in what is possibly the most chaotic nation in the most chaotic era of this planet.
Exactly. I might get onto that in a little bit when we talk about the your new show on Peacock. But could you perhaps start by telling us about your childhood and what drove this interest in wildlife? Where did it come from?
Well, I was born in Tasmania, the untamed island of Tasmania, the last place you get a good cup of coffee on the way to Antarctica, and the home of some of the most interesting plants and animals on planet Earth. And so that was a pretty good start to fill your lungs. Their first breath was Tasmanian air. That put me in a good place. However, my father and mother were both medical professionals, and my father had a chance to do postgrad at the Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh in Scotland. So while I was still, a portable mammal, they picked me up and we headed over to the UK. And after completing his studies, he did a number of I guess, are they locums? I'm not sure what they're called. But anyway, we lived in Bridgend, Wales, and in London, in England. And my first memories are of animals. Growing up, we lived in accommodation that was part of an asylum next to the hospital in Bridgend in Wales. And my first memories are of seeing hedgehogs, and it was snowing. And that's, I was only about 3 or 4, I guess. And then from the UK, my parents ran hospitals in Southeast Asia, in Hong Kong and Singapore. So we've gone from European temperate climate to a Southeast Asian tropical climate. And, we had all sorts of constrictors and lizards living there. And that was my childhood, running around unsupervised, snatching animals from their native habitat, bringing them home, my mother ordering me to return them to where I found them. And I just had that love. I should mention my mom's father was a dairy farmer. Grandpa Ernie, lovely, lovely man in Southern Australia. And I love spending the holidays with him, milking the cows and so on. So it was this sort of immersion in nature on numerous continents. And then when I became semi-literate, I picked up the books of Gerald Durrell and just absolutely fell in love. Now, it's no point preaching to you two, but to fellow thick-fingered, nose-picking Americans, if you haven't read the work of Gerald Durrell, you're missing out. He was the highest selling author in the English language for a very long time. He is the younger brother of Lawrence Durrell, wonderful Faber and Faber author, the novelist who wrote the Alexandria Quartet, a masterful writer. And Gerald Durrell, both as a zoologist, a conservationist, and as a humorist, has inspired my entire career. I am sort of a feeble shadow of his legacy. But now jumping forward, served in the military. I was a paratrooper, blah, 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 wrote some books. But years later, when I had some money of my own, I was able to put my money where my mouth was and get involved in various conservation projects. And one of the great joys of my life was to become a life benefactor of the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust, now just called Durrell. And I think of them as the Green Berets of conservation, because they jump in somewhere, they don't have a lot of money, they liaise with the native population, the indigenous peoples, run these projects brilliantly on a shoestring, and then leave, and the projects keep running. Whereas the model for many other projects, and particularly here in the States, is you put a ton of money in, you bring a lot of people in, and then you leave and the project falls over a lot of the time. And Durrell does it right. So very proud to be associated with them. Now, here's a funny story associated with that. I was tagging great white sharks in Southeast Australia, and when you tag a new shark, you have the honor of naming it. And so we tagged a 4-meter great white, a male called, and we got to name it. I named it Gerald Durrell. And so I went over for the annual general meeting to Jersey in the Channel Islands between England and France for the Durrell Conservation Trust meeting. One of my heroes, Monty Python fame, John Cleese, is also a benefactor. I'd never met him before, but of course I worship him. And I was hoping to get a chance to meet him when I was presenting. You get this certificate for naming a new shark, and giving it to Jerry's widow, Lee Durrell, who also, I think she's a primatologist, has a PhD project with lemurs. They met in Madagascar, as you do. And so I was waiting to get my chance to meet Cleese, never met him. And then I'm outside the hotel in St. Heliers in Jersey, and a black swan appears in this pond in the Channel Islands. Now, black swans are from my part of the world, so I was astonished, and I don't think anyone else who was there really appreciated how unusual it was that this black swan is sitting here in Europe. And so as I'm getting excited and telling, the brightly colored drink swilling locals sitting around me on these deck chairs why this was special, the swan just gets too annoyed by my proximity and attacks me, hissing and flapping. So of course I'm slapping it in the head with a flip flop, with a leather thong, and then Cleese suddenly appears. What are you doing? And that's how we've become friends for many decades now, and done a number of conservation projects together. So that is the summary of my life and times. So all I can say is plenty of misadventure, plenty of poor decisions, and I would say that my limited sense of self-preservation has caused me a great deal of fun and harm, and I regret none of it.
Yeah, that echoes with me. Yeah.
Indeed.
Fantastic.
And actually the book, My Family and Other Animals, was one of my favorite books growing up. And in fact, one of the very few useful things I ever did at boarding school in England was to get the English teacher to make the whole class read My Family and Other Animals as one of the key textbooks. So
Brilliant.
Fantastic book, really.
Yeah, that's where everyone should start. If you've not read Durrell's work, My Family and Other Animals, set in Corfu in Greece in 1939, is exceptional. And many of you probably have seen the television adaptations. The more recent one is excellent. I can't remember what it's called, though. Is it The Durrells Abroad or something? Anyway, it's very good.
So, Bradley, you've had an incredibly varied career. And I was wondering if you could just describe some of the highlights for us and how you actually became to be such a phenomenally successful author.
Well, first of all, thank you. You sound like my mother when she speaks to me in private, but not in front of my father. That's very generous of you. Look, it's a lot of happy accidents, a lot of hard work. And, I'm very grateful. My mother, as I said, she grew up the daughter of a dairy farmer, and she's just a tough country girl, and she's a nurse. And she's just, nursing is, particularly when she was doing it, is tough work. I mean, it's basically poo and death. And in those days, particularly with physio, it was pretty brutal. So she's just a tough country girl with a huge heart, and she's fearless. And I'm very lucky to have inherited the genetic traits to do silly things for the hell of it. On my father's side, he's a gentleman of letters, and he is very much painfully addicted to details. And so I like to think that at my best, I have a little bit of both of that. And so when I finished, we were raised in Europe and in Asia. Went back in time. I went back to Australia in time to finish my primary education. And then I was all set on pursuing a career in industrial design, if you could believe that. And I played rugby at a fairly high level, and I enjoyed art. And my wonderful parents made it very clear to me that those were not serious professions. So there was no rugby career for me, and there was no art career for me at that time. And then an extraordinary thing happened. I was with my mother at the supermarket, and there was an army recruiting van looking for helicopter pilots for what was then the new in-service, I think it was the S-70 Black Hawk. And I snuck away from my mother and had a preliminary interview, and then went back the next week and showed them my report cards and so forth. And they said, look, you could be a helicopter pilot on a special contract, but, and I should mention, I fell in love with helicopters in Northern Australia. My father took me on a hunting camping trip to the Northern Territory, and I was there in time to not only fall in love with the giant estuarine crocodiles and the Asiatic water buffalo that were everywhere at that time, but to see the wild bushmaster. And these properties are so big. The one we were on was 2 million acres, if you can believe that. These properties are so big, they can't afford to fence them. And they don't even bother putting in roads because of the wet season just wipes everything away. And so these properties are so large, they have to muster with a helicopter. And over the course of a week, they bring in the wild cattle. And there are two things. In those days, there were millions of Asiatic water buffalo. They've since been either exterminated or domesticated. And by domesticated, I mean they get dipped to remove the parasites, and they have the tips of their horns clipped so that you know they've been dipped and they're not going to continue to pass on parasites that domestic animals can't deal with. And then they have the introduced domestic cattle, which are usually a Santa Gertrudis cross, big animal that's very much able to tolerate the wet and steamy conditions and the enormous volume of parasites and pestiferous insects. Anyway, over the course of a week, they gradually, with helicopters, bring these animals closer and closer and closer until in the final days, they bring them into a clearing that's many hundreds of acres or dozens of hectares, and then dozens of vehicles with these bull bars that go all four sides of the vehicle, kind of encourage them into this giant fabric V. And then at the nexus of the V, you have a gate which determines which of the two paddocks these animals are held in. And as I said, they're then processed for sale and or for breeding and or for domestication. These helicopter pilots are insane. Small helicopters, very fast, two-seaters, and they would have a 44-gallon drum of aviation fuel to counterweight the balance of the pilot, because who doesn't want to fly at high speeds, low to the ground with a bomb, a 300-pound bomb, and they would put the canopy of the helicopter into the trees, the blades touching the top of the trees to push these cattle through, and turn so close to the ground, the blades were actually kicking up dirt. I mean, and I was so thrilled by this display that I thought, that's what I've got to do. I've got to fly helicopters. So after being accepted for industrial design at a university in Brisbane, I declined it. And I applied to the Royal Military College. And for my sins, I was accepted. But here's the weird thing. I was only in the college for a year or so, and I just fell in love with paratroopers. And I just thought, that's what I want to do. I want to jump out of perfectly serviceable aircraft. And so I declined the path to aviation and ended up getting into infantry and being accepted by the paras. And that was my career. So that set me on a certain course, but I was doing an operation in Northern Australia in the Arafura Sea, training operation. We had Brits there, we had Navy SEALs and all the rest of it. And I caught a tropical respiratory infection that absolutely destroyed me. And when we went back to base, which was south of Sydney, my lungs just shut down, and that was it. My entire career was over fairly quickly, and I was deemed what they call CZE, combat zone exempt. Not much good for a para whose dream is to then go on to the SAS, which is the Commonwealth Special Forces. And so I had the choice of getting a desk job or becoming an instructor, and I chose neither. I managed to resign my commission, join the inactive Army Reserve, and had to start over again. And this time, having shed sweat and blood for my country, I decided that the gloves were off. I could do whatever I wanted now, and I thought I was no longer in shape to play professional rugby, but I thought I'm going to go into the arts. And then that started decades of impoverishment and frustration, unrelenting failure in many directions, and all sorts of miserable jobs. Now, I was a waiter at a Mexican restaurant. I was a bouncer at a club. I was an art gallery guide. I was a giant red inflated M&M for a confectionery promotion. And I even did some male modeling, mostly for dairy products, not sure why, and some movie extra work. I just took the money where I could get it and kept committing to my work. And look, after about a decade, I managed to get my 8th book published. So the 8th book I'd written, but my first book published. And to everyone's astonishment, it went on to be a major international bestseller. It's since sold over 13 million copies. And suddenly I had a new career. And that is when I said, well, my other life passion has been wildlife. Gerald Durrell, set a fire that never got out. In many ways, my love of animals as a child has kept me going. And I've never really grown up in that regard. And I started committing to conservation and funding projects and being involved. And of course, that gives you the ticket to go into the field and work with professionals. And then I started writing books about the subject. And most of my books were about animals in some way, even if they were works of humor or whatever else. And it's just grown over time until we've done, been involved with hundreds of projects and seen, I wouldn't say thousands, but many hundreds of facilities. And it's been a great joy. And the success of the books meant that whenever we sold a book in a certain territory, we would donate money to projects in that field. And if you wanted me to come for a book tour, you had to let me go and see something I haven't seen before. And I think that's a fair deal. And so, because honestly, otherwise it's just airports and bookstores. So I really, took advantage. I think the combination of the sort of the fantasist wannabe poet who's a former, killing machine, I think it gives you a certain edge in knowing when to take risks and knowing how to strategize to do things that you've always wanted to do. And now, by accident, I actually had a horrible thing. I was on my farm in Tasmania. I went into town, as I do once a week, to get the newspapers in the mail and have a meal cooked by someone who knows what the hell they're doing. And I left my gate open, and my 3 Great Danes got out and killed my neighbor's sheep. And they were declared dangerous and destroyed, and that destroyed me. And so I came over to the States about 14 years ago to just have a sabbatical. And I was asked by the Walt Disney Company to be their executive creative consultant in residence with their Walt Disney Imagineering Blue Sky team, the people who dream up all the roller coasters, because you got a space guy, you got a military guy, you got an animal guy, you got a writer. And I had a wonderful time. But the best of all was that I met the beautiful architect who is now my wife and the mother of our 2 Australian-American hybrid children. And so it just sort of worked out. And in between, I just decided not to say no to things. And when I had the opportunity to train with the Russian Space Program, this is back when Russia was cool, by the way. It's not recent. This is back in 2004. And look, it's basically vomiting into helmets. That's the whole program. But that I did that. It was incredible. I was too big. I lost a lot of weight. I got down to 105 kilos, but it was still a little bit too big. I never got a mission, but I'm so grateful to have been there because it's so inspiring. The men and women from all over the world working together, pushing, human knowledge into space and beyond. It's an incredible place. I'm very grateful to have been there. It's rough traveling. I wouldn't recommend it for everybody. I had to dislocate my left shoulder to get into the all-on spacesuit for extravehicular activity training in this giant tank. I mean, this thing is basically 100 Olympic swimming pools straight down, and you get down there in your spacesuit, and it's all very difficult and nauseating. I have that much more respect for astronauts now because of it. And then, I would take the opportunity to work on a book in a different country and get a sense of places. So living in New Zealand and French Polynesia happened to be there for the Havia, which is the traditional games. And so why not? And so I took part in the rock lifting, and I was doing a lot of powerlifting and a lot of strength sports at that time. Managed to win the rock lifting title, which was great, although I did fart blood for about a week after that. And then almost died in the banana race got to carry this enormous, 50, 60 pounds of bananas on a pole and run, just over a mile. And I was beaten by a guy who was about 65. I mean, it was just unbelievably tough, these guys. So, I basically have been someone who tries to live a life worth writing about. And then when it comes to my books or my television shows or film, and most of the latter only happened because I was in LA. I don't know if you're familiar with the Chelsea Lately show, which was on E for a very long time, a comedy late night show. And the strange connection there was that she was dating some hunky Canadian wildlife expert. They broke up. She didn't want to see him again. They're moving to the Universal Soundstage #1, beautiful soundstage here in Hollywood. And she needed a new wildlife guy. And she knew Betty White, and I know Betty White through wildlife conservation, not through Hollywood. And she said, well, why don't you get BTG? And they said, well, we want someone that has tremendous knowledge of animals. She said, yes. Someone with credible conservation chops. She said, yes. And someone that Chelsea won't want to have sex with. And I went, perfect. So off we went, and that opened a lot of doors. And I had never any intention of being in front of the camera or doing any of these things. But as I said, don't say no, see where it goes. And here we are. So you couldn't have planned this. Only a sort of a drunk bat would have possibly sketched this life career path. But look at me, not dead, having the time of my life. I've got no regrets. I'm very grateful for the way that life has spilled out in front of me.
That is one of the most extraordinary CVs on the planet, I'm sure. I mean, what a trajectory. And I'm familiar with some of the things you've done, but Penguin Bloom, that I haven't read the book, but I saw the movie with my kids. We all loved it, and it all made us want to go back to Australia. And it's such a lovely, lovely film, and such a heartwarming, tender film. And if you'd told me it was a paratrooper powerlifter who'd written that, I'd have, no, you're not, you can't be right. So you're a breaker of stereotypes as well. But wildlife has been this thread through it all.
It has, and even with that movie, I'm a big softie. I'm a closet lovey. I love musicals. I love poetry. And if you read my books or see the films and you cry or laugh, it's because I cried and laughed. And one of the nice things about starting life as a paratrooper is I wish every young man in particular today could do it, because you've got nothing to prove after that. You've watched your friends die, you've suffered, and I just refuse to pretend to be tough when I'm feeling emotional. I let it out. And I love beautiful things, and I love weepy stories. I love fresh flowers. I spend most of my time gardening when I want to relax. These are absolutely premium, top shelf manly pursuits, and I recommend them to every young man. So the thing about Penguin Bloom is that, and obviously I'm going to say the book is better than the film, but the film is excellent, and I'm very proud to have made it. It's a true story. For those that don't know, it's about a mother of 3 boys and her husband who go on a holiday to Asia. A shocking accident leaves her paralyzed, and at the depth of her depression, she rescues an injured native magpie in Sydney, Australia. Of course, magpies, for those in America listening to this, does anyone in the UK listen to this, or is it just Americans?
No, UK, a few. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Either way, it's not a true magpie. The American and Eurasian magpies are corvids. In Australia, the magpie is actually a butcher bird, Cractatus. So it's a very different bird, but very similar. I would say almost equally clever, but far more muscular, determined, and playful. You'll see them rolling on the ground like a bull terrier sometimes. And of course, they're famous for attacking bushwalkers and cyclists during the summer when the males become very territorial. I remember having a split in my head. I tackled some guy in rugby, and I was still in primary school, elementary school, and hit him so hard he bent his head over and his teeth split my scalp. Not a problem. We're right next to my dad's rooms at the hospital. Went up there, got it sutured, but of course they shave a little bit of your hair. In those days, I had a significant amount of hair, more than you, John, less than you, Charles. And we were walking to lunch, as we did once a week, to have dinner with my mum and dad at the hospital cafeteria, which we look forward to because it's a nice hot meal. And this magpie came down, swooped, saw the injury, and just pecked it as hard as he could and split all my stitches open again. Yeah. Had to go back in and get resutured. So they have a mixed reputation at home as mischief makers and bullies, but they're a very clever bird and can be quite delightful. Anyway, the point of the story is that she meeting this bird is a turning point in her recovery, And now the book was a big success at home and abroad, but I'd never done a movie before, certainly not a Hollywood movie. I'd made documentaries about animals, and it was a real struggle. And I got some advice from John Cleese, and he said, never, ever believe that the producers know what they're doing. And so you've got to get in there and do it yourself. And a number of people recommend that I try to lock up the star for the movie first, rather than sell the movie to a studio. And so I tried to do that. And I had good representation. We really wanted Naomi Watts to play Sam. They look vaguely familiar. She's an Aussie, well, a Brit Aussie, but she can speak, with Australian accent effortlessly. She's what you would call an emotional athlete. She just loves to take on these challenging roles. And to go as an able-bodied person to play a mother who becomes paralyzed and is depressed and then tries to find her way back is a tremendous challenge. So we chose her. Well, a year after I started trying to connect her to the film, I had no success. No Hollywood agents or power people could do anything. And so I did what I do. I turned to the zoo mafia. And I happened to know her father, who was the CEO of Taronga Zoo, where I'm a governor. I've known him for many, many, many years. Lovely man, Guy Cooper. And I knew his daughter, Emma Cooper, who I also knew, but not as well as her dad, was a close friend of Naomi Watts. Naomi Watts was the matron of honor at her wedding. So I called her, and she was in LA, and I said, hey, I want to use you to get to Naomi Watts. Let me bring you this book. Well, that was on a Friday. On Saturday, Naomi read it, loved it, wanted to star in it, and wanted to produce it. And boom, after a year of ineffectual misadventure, suddenly we had a movie set up, and the rest sort of fell into place. Now, I don't know that happens for everybody, but all I can say is being in the zoo world can help you make it in Hollywood.
I'm still waiting for that opportunity, but I'm sure it's just around the corner.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is, Charles.
So you've already touched on a few of your adventures and misadventures with wildlife, but I know you've got many, many more. Would you like to share some of your favorite stories, particularly with mammals?
Sure. No, I'd love to. I would say that, and this is for everybody who's listening, who is either a fellow wildlife veteran, but more importantly, the young folk coming up, is that never believe anybody that tells you they know what their animal specialty is going to do. We used to say in the paras that when you get over your fear of falling, you're going to die, because you stop being careful and you start making terrible mistakes. So whenever I hear someone say, oh, I've been studying this snake or this shark or this bear or this tiger for so long, I know exactly what she is going to do. And I just go, oh, well, he or she will be dead pretty soon, because that animal at some day is going to do something you never expected. And so I always try to be safe. And I know that doesn't sound like me, because, I've had 21 surgeries and 8 treatments for rabies and God knows how many broken bones. But I genuinely try to temper my risks. And so when I have been injured, it's because I was careless and stopped being attentive to all the details. And most of those things you could see a mile away. Like, let me give you a few basic tips. If, and this is only if you don't want your testicles to end up in the eager mouth of a very large, giant pink Polynesian stingray, don't forget that you have an open bag of bait shrimp in your swim trunks when you get in the water. Simple procedures that can save you a lot of pain. They have that suck and crunch bony plate. It worked up my leg, doing these big hickeys on the leg. Next thing you know, my right testicle's in its mouth. Incredible pain. And what do you do? This giant slimy pancake of the sea, you can't just push it off and end up, you don't know how it's going to jab you with that serrated spur on its tail. It's filled with bacteria. You just got to take the pain and try to make you out of the water with as much dignity as you can muster. That's one classic error that I'm sure all of us have made at some time. The other one is, if your mother gives you a synthetic musk-based cologne and you're working with megabats, gray-headed flying foxes during the breeding season, don't put it on. Don't put it on, because it incites just an extraordinary sexual frenzy. Within a very short period of time of picking up these injured bats, one of them, in my case 2, became very sexually aroused, wrapped up my head in these sort of giant leathery wings, a lot of screaming, mostly from me. And the next thing you know, this sort of pink lipstick of its loins was making its way to my oral cavity, quivering with carnal intent. And here's another thing. If somehow, no questions asked, you end up with megabat ejaculate on your face and in your ear, Do not wash it out with cold water or hot water. It turns to chewing gum. That's what I would say to you. And it's everybody wants you. If you're doing any projects, then they've darted the mother or father or whatever, and you end up handling small animals. They're always stronger than you think. A Mexican jaguar cub. I remember it was only 3 months old. It beat the hell out of me. Absolutely beat the hell out of me. I remember in Russia, and I sponsor a brown bear program in Kamchatkan bears, and these 2 cubs, and they were very young, and they just absolutely beat. And they had a muzzle on, and they still beat me up. So everything is stronger than you think. I was very heavily involved in sun bears, Halactus melianus, and these guys are the smallest true bear. And they are small. I mean, they're only about, so I understand imperial and metric, but it's still very hard for me to convert. I'll struggle through this if someone can help me, but they get to about 4 or 5 feet tall and they weigh about 60 pounds. What's that in, was that 1.5 meters and about
25 kilos.
25 kilos?
Yeah.
There you go. Anyway, I'm a big unit. I'm 192 centimeters or 6'3". At fighting weight, I'm about 120 kilos, or what's that, 280 pounds. Big, strong guy. I was lifting enormous weights. The rock lifting championship, the boulder that I lifted to win was 450 pounds to my shoulder. I leg press over 1,200 pounds. I tried to break this 2-3 year sugarcane in half to get it into this exhibit for these sun bears that we're working with, and I couldn't do it. You've seen men on television here in America breaking a baseball bat over their knee. I could do that. I couldn't do this. And there were 2 bears, and I really wanted them both to get a piece of the sugarcane. I gave up, sweating, gasping, and pungent, and just sort of sat it down on the ground. I sort of stuck it into a log and left. The bears released this, this 60-pound bear comes over with one paw and just snaps it like it was celery. You cannot ever think for a second that you can consider how strong these animals are. They are so powerful. Anyway, I remember, and I'll come back to this later, my great passion was bears, but I'd only ever seen a few of them. And then I ended up over here. I married an American. That was unexpected. And now I'm in romantic exile, and I hate living in these. We were living closer to LA then, the giant smug bubble full of angry vegans. And I was having a terrible time. And whenever my life went away to work on projects, I just said, I was so happy when she was here. And she was building hotels and wonderful things in Tokyo and Paris and on the other side of the country in Orlando. And I was so unhappy when she was gone. And I said, what can I do here that I couldn't do anywhere else on Earth? And I just thought, wow, home to the biggest brown bears on the planet. And so I started traveling to Alaska. Anyway, when I finally got to Southeast Alaska and I got to Kutznawu in the Alexander Archipelago, and here I am with my Tlingit bear guide, and you're face to face, no moat, no barriers, no electric fences, nothing like that. And there's this giant, anywhere from 600 to 900 kilos, so well over 1,000 pounds, a couple of them just on the door of 2,000 pounds. And these are the largest carnivores on the planet. These are great carnivorous gods. And I remember seeing my first giant coastal Alaskan brown bear from Kutznawu, this big boar. And I remember I actually heard my penis gasp. I mean, just this phenomenal creature of your dreams and nightmares. And you don't want to make mistakes. And I've studied them for many years now. But what I would tell you is, yes, these big bears, particularly brown bears, are very binary. They're starting at point A, they're going to point B. And as long as you don't bother them while they do that, they'll generally not bother you. But if you cross between point A and point B, even at a safe distance, and they see you or smell you, now they're rethinking why you're there. And you've caused a problem. So yeah, there are basic things you can do to keep safe. Another thing that I do is I always eat a lot of meat and fish when I'm around bears. I want them to smell that I'm a carnivore too. Because big bears are very, very risk averse. They don't want to pick a fight because they know there's always a bigger bear out there. And there is. I mean, these bears are colossal. So I always eat plenty of meat and fish, so I smell like a carnivore. And that means they're more likely to look at me and go, he looks big enough to be a problem. I can still kill him, but would he blind me or harm me in some way? They're not stupid. bears are incredibly intelligent. I've seen them split open a giant butter clam, dig it up from 8 feet in the sand, wet sand. You imagine digging 8 feet in wet sand, how hard that is. Pull it out, split it open, eat the flesh, and not break a single piece of shell. I mean, this is an enormous animal, and it just yet so delicate. They're very, very clever. Anyway, lots of incredible adventures with giant animals, but all the mistakes I've made have been because of my own stupidity. I remember doing a photo shoot, and I had a Burmese python on my shoulder, and it was very big and very heavy. And I was too proud to admit that it was hurting. And by the time I finished, I'd torn my meniscus in my shoulder. That's on me. And most of my silly incidents, I remember once I heard the myths about these gigantic coconut crabs, the largest terrestrial crabs. I mean, is that real? So I shaved a little patch on my forearm, caught a very large coconut crab, and let him pinch a tiny piece of my forearm. Let me tell you, it's incredibly real. It pinched so hard that this little circular indentation of the tips of the claws, the skin just died. It was almost like a pressure-induced necrosis. It was immediate molecular level of panic. I just trying to get this thing off. And the only way I could do it, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, is sticking my finger in its cloaca to make it think something was happening, that it was not consensual, and it let go because I couldn't get the claws off. I couldn't. I put a screwdriver in and twisted it, and it would not release. So, I mean, that's not something you can blame on nature taking its vengeance. That's just me being an idiot. I will say that, like most people who do field work, and this is the same as in the military, it's the non-combat injuries that get you. It's not the heroic thing where a pig disembowels you. It's where you're not properly prepared for parasites or, thorny plants. Because the way thorny plants work is it's not just the thorn. It's not the scratching you that matters. It's the fact that 1,000 other creatures have been scratched before you. So now you have effectively a poison-tipped weapon, and you're going to get infections. And infections in the field can be deadly. One of the classic mistakes I remember was friends of mine going surfing in Melanesia, specifically Bougainville, and great surf, whatever. And they would get these cuts on coral or whatever, and then foolishly would keep surfing thinking the salt water would cure it. Well, the salt water there is nothing like the salt water in England or in southern United States or in Australia, well, certainly southern Australia, because it's so full of micro creatures that you will become more infected every time you go into the water. And then you get sepsis and you have all sorts of issues, and suddenly you're getting toes and feet cut off. So it's those sorts of small things that get you every time. And that's certainly been for me.
So you say you've been bitten by 7 or 8 rabid animals? Any sort of particular species?
Woolly monkeys. That's a classic trap because they look so adorable. So I was in the Amazon, up the Amazon Negro, and took part of a project with the Amazon Rangers who arrest poachers. And they're primarily taking these beautiful parrots as well as small primates to sell on the illegal pet trade. And I wasn't involved in the policing effort. I was involved in the relocation. And so the first thing you do, because poachers aren't going to tell you that where they got them, is they go to an isolated quarantine location. They're kept in there under observation for 3 months, and then you repatriate them. Well, not really repatriation, release them, a soft release into the rainforest, and they make their way to what we hope is a reasonable territory. And you wouldn't believe the stuff that you get there. Spider monkeys, wakaris. Wakaris are those, for those who don't know, it's these just stunning, freakishly looking apes with a bald, the red wakari, which is the one that we had. These, I mean, the face is as red as I like to say, as a Catholic priest pleasuring himself to climax in a sauna. I mean, this bizarre red face and head, and then this wonderful auburn shaggy hair and this club-like tail, which allows them to do very special acrobatics, very Cirque du Soleil type characters, very shy normally. So wakaris, spiders, and then spider monkeys, and then woolly monkeys, which are probably, I think most people would agree that the woolly monkey is the most attractive, New World monkey. It just is perfectly symmetrical, beautiful, dense gray-brown fur. It's very soft, very plush. Anyway, there was this one particular young woolly, and he had been orphaned during the time that he was in quarantine. Sadly, his mother had died of some disease. And so they opened the door to release him. He wouldn't go. He was wild monkey, but still hanging around. And as we know, semi-domesticated animals are always the most dangerous. When they're not afraid of you or they're too curious, you can often get confused interactions that result in, blood and weeping and rabies. So this thing just kept coming up to me, and I hadn't showered or changed in many, many days. And you imagine, effectively a 300-pound armpit walking around the facility. And obviously I smelled like a big monkey. And the way monkeys work is that they want to test the hierarchy to see when I get promoted. And no monkey wants to stay as the intern in the mailroom. They want to make their way up to the corner office. And so this monkey would kind of taunt me and hang out with me and jump on me and cuddle with me. But then he would start biting me to see who was going to be the boss. Anyway, I didn't know what to do. And I spoke to my, to Yuri, my Amazon guide and friend, and I said, I don't know what to do with this monkey. And he goes, in his broken English, he says, bite him back. And Yuri sounded Russian, and that was unintentional. So I did. I grabbed his little head and I bit his ear really, really hard. Not Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield hard, but really, really hard. And he screamed. And from then I was his big daddy monkey, and we were best friends. But he still bit the hell out of me, and I still had to go in and get the 3 rabies shots, which if you haven't had them, don't.
So you've talked a little bit about your bear work, and you've been involved with a very large number of conservation projects. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your favorite work, your favorite conservation work?
It's difficult. Not as difficult as choosing a favorite trial, because that's easy. We just don't admit it. But it's difficult because there's so many great projects, and each one faces enormous hurdles. I mean, funding is always a problem, personnel and government access, all this stuff it's always difficult. So if you're listening and you run a project and you're feeling like it's not going anywhere, then you're actually succeeding, because that's how it is for everybody. But there are some many special ones. I mean, my work in Alaska is obviously a personal highlight. Being adopted by the Dechitan clan of the Tlingit people is one of I would say, the greatest professional honor I've ever had. To be given access to their native land and to work with them and be friends and part of their families. That's very, very special. One of the ones that I'm most proud of, though, is the Painted Dog Conservation Inc. project. It started in Zimbabwe. Now it's also in Zambia and other places. That was started by a good friend of mine, John Lemon, and his wife, Angela Lemon. John Lemon was a very highly regarded zoo professional in Australia. And he ran the taxon advisory group for cheetahs, for the Species Survival Alliance, the SSA, and a number of other species as well. And he got very passionately involved with painted dogs, also known as cave hunting dogs, like Lycaon pictus. And it was interesting because they're their own genus. And the obvious comparison to us in Australia and me as a Tasmanian is the Tasmanian devil. There's only one of them, and you can't interbreed them with any other species. You can do that with some parrots and other things. You cannot bring back that species once it's gone, just like the thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger. So, you're looking at these rare creatures, and they were disappearing so quickly. The largest population at that time was in Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe under Mobutu was a complete mess. And so one of the victims of civil unrest and war are animals. They get shelled and shot. They get chased out of their habitat. They become victims to people who have lost their livelihoods and will eat anything they can catch in a snare. And the connection between the Tasmanian devil, my state fauna emblem, Heresius sarcophilus, and Lycaon pictus was such that he wanted to do something, and he would take time without salary to go over and start organizing facilities and so forth. And finally, he called me one day and said, I'm quitting my job. I'm going to start this conservation group and go over there and do the work myself. And so I was able to come on as the founding benefactor of his program. And I'm so proud of that, because it's the only time when I've come in at the beginning. more or less. It's the only time I've been there from day one. And to see how Painted Dog Conservation Inc. has grown and the range of projects they run, education for villagers, support for families in villages, employing locals, obviously saving animals from snares, getting data on the way they live by putting on tracking collars and so many other things, mitigating roadkill. It has been absolutely inspiring to see how, in his case, one man and his wife can start something that now employs dozens of people and has thousands of supporters. It's still not a massive project, but it's incredibly inspiring. So I would say Painted Dog Conservation Inc. is one of the most special. Some of the other ones that were very special was funding the mountain chicken program in Montserrat with Durrell. It was such a weird thing. First of all you had to say was mountain chicken, and I wanted to be there. It's actually a very large frog, and like all frogs, susceptible to fatal fungal infections and so on. And also in this case, because they're about the size of a Cornish hen, quite a good meal if that's what you like to eat. So those two pressures were wiping them out, and that was a successful project, like most of Durrell projects. And then the last one I would say, which is a bit unusual, and this was with a number of people. I think it was through WCS in New York, which is part of the New York Zoo's Bronx Zoo and so forth. And they are a fantastic facility, and they support hundreds of research and rescue, rehab, and conservation programs all around the world. They spend about $300 million. It's amazing what they do. Don't hold me to that figure, but it's enormous, more than just about any facility I know. And I was over there seeing Rick Hudson, who runs Turtle Survival Alliance out of Dallas, Fort Worth. And I'm the international conservation ambassador for Fort Worth Zoo in Texas. So I've known him. He's a great guy. And I'm meeting with him in New York. And the most extraordinary thing happened. There was a turtle, which no one had seen for 50 years, just an empty shell in the British Museum. And it was the Burmese roof turtle. In those days, Kachuga tributata, now Bataga bataga. And no one had seen this beautiful looking turtle. During the breeding season, the male's head, which has this sweeping upturned nose, looks like some sort of Nordic skier. And its head turns this vivid yellow-green. It's quite stunning. It's a big turtle too, big river turtle. And no one had seen one for 50 years. Durrell offer what we would call in the Army a knife and fork course on conservation for suitable candidates from all around the world. And this fellow from Burma, or now Myanmar, was over there in Jersey, did the course, came back, and he would just make a habit of looking in these Buddhist temple ponds, because the Buddhist practitioners in this part of the world have a particular thing that they do that's unusual. Part of their pilgrimage, their religious pilgrimage to these temples, they want to release an animal or provide liberty or rescue to a living creature, a sentient creature. And so you have all these dealers who sell birds and butterflies and turtles and fish. And I'm not endorsing that at all, quite the opposite. But they buy these creatures or capture them themselves, take them to the temple as part of their religious pilgrimage, and release them. So they set them free, and that's part of their religious practice. And so knowing this ex-Jersey is graduate from Jersey School, he would look in all these ponds and see if there was anything that is unusual, because a lot of creatures concentrated there that shouldn't normally be there. And because of that, this smart fellow found a creature we hadn't seen for 5, almost 6 decades. And what to do? How do we take this and do something with it? So it was a big male. He kept looking, found a female, had nowhere to put it. So I was in New York, and they said, who wants to help? And of course, I'm with Rick, and I'm like, sure, I'll help. And we did a small funding program with the zoo in Mandalay to take over one of the water troughs for the elephants, the Asiatic elephants, to set up a micro habitat for these last surviving turtles. And from that, they then built a larger facility, and the project grew and grew and grew. And now there's thousands of these turtles, and not just from those couple of animals. They found some more, and then they had enough money to go to the outreach to speak with local fishermen. Have you seen this animal? Where have you seen it? And now there's thousands of them. And I'm not saying that we brought it back from the edge of extinction, but certainly you could give us some credit for that. But to be there, and these things start small. One person with knowledge, passion, and energy, identifies an opportunity to rescue a species, reaches out for help. We start small in an elephant's drinking trough, then a habitat, then working with the locals and the fishermen. And now you have an animal that is no longer on the tipping point of oblivion. So I'm very proud to have played a small part in that project as well. Those are probably three of my favorites.
Yeah, wonderful stories. And as you say, never underestimate the power of one single person with a lot of passion to be able to change things. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Bradley, obviously you've seen lots of different mammals all across the world. Do you have a favorite species or a favorite animal that you've worked with?
I do. For me, it's definitely Alaskan coastal brown bears. And it's interesting because there are a number of different subspecies there, but I forget which law is it, not Green's law, but the law that says that the animals that are close to the coast are going to get bigger and bigger. And that's the case because, in fact, the genetics versus Arctic are going to be extraordinarily different from central Alaska. So, for example, the grizzly bears you'd see in Denali to the ones we see in the Alexander Archipelago, and then, of course, Katmai, Kenai, and Kodiak, although Kodiak is Middendorfic, so it's a different species. But they're all huge, absolutely huge on the coast. And to put it simply, the size of a bear by the coast in Southeast Alaska, even though the genetics are in principle the same, are 2.5 times larger than a large bear in Denali. So it's a difference between a moped and a truck. You know, these things are very, very big. And look, it's for many reasons. They are isolated. They don't get bothered. They have more temperate conditions, access to food all year round. Obviously, succulent sedges and goose-tongue grass and all sorts of an embarrassment of berries. I mean, if it wasn't for the giant carnivorous gods roaming these islands, you would call every single island in Southeast Alaska sort of a paradise for berry fanciers. I mean, all manner of blueberries, some as big as your thumb almost, salmon berries, which I'd never had until I got there. They look a lot like a blackberry, but they're generally a salmon pink, hence the name. But you can get them as yellows and reds. They're delicious. And thimbleberries, which are like a big fat button-shaped raspberry. They taste a little bit of rust and blood, which for some reason I seem to enjoy. So all these berries, and then you have 2 runs, unlike whatever you've seen in the movies. There are 2 runs of salmon per year. Now, sometimes they're not very good for various reasons. For example, one year I was up there and it rained and rained and rained and rained. And the way these salmon find their way back is through the chemical signature of the water that they were born in. And so it was so diluted, we weren't getting these fish coming back, and that affected the bears and everything got topsy-turvy. And then there are other mammals they can eat. I mean, these bears are so big, they've eaten all the black bears that are in that part of the world. There are no black bears on these islands. There are no wolves on Kutsnawu. There are in other parts of the ABC Islands like Baranof and Chichagof, but not in Kutsnawu because they eat the wolves. Occasionally, a moose swims over from the mainland. It's a significant swim. It's English Channel type swimming. And they get over there. Moose are excellent swimmers. And within minutes, a brown bear is decapitated and devouring it. So, but they do have a small deer there that's more elusive called the Sitka black-tailed deer. So these guys have got food. Oh, and seals, of course. I should have mentioned the seals. So they can eat enormous bodybuilding type meals pretty much all year round, but for a short period of hibernation through the middle of the winter. And even in the winter, they get up. Hibernation is always misexplained. You know, most bears don't hibernate solidly like they do in Hollywood movies. They get up and do things. And so these bears are enormous. The genetics, obviously. And that was my point of interest, because I was up there looking at these bears, and we came across a giant bear that was known locally as Shea Shah, which means Blood Mountain. Great name for a rock band, by the way. And it was huge. I might send you a photo afterwards. And it had these incredibly long forelimbs and a very long neck and a relatively compact head. And I said, this is ridiculous, but it looks like, Arctocebedus, the American short-faced bear, which has been extinct for a very, very long time. And so that became the quest, that became the documentary Fear Island, Fortress of the Bears. And that name comes from the Promišljeniki, the Siberian fur trappers who in the 1700s were the first to travel to this part of America. And they were primarily after sea otters. And they'd been through Kodiak and they'd been through Kenai and Katmai. and they get down to Kutsnawu, and they describe the island as Ostrov Kutsnoi, Island of Fear. Let's not go there. And the name in Tlingit, the native people who've been there for over 10,000 years, is Kutsnawu, which means fortress of the bears. This is the bear's place. Kuts is their word for bear, and it means armored chest, indicating how impossible they are to kill. So that became the basis of that documentary, which you can watch online somewhere on Apple or whatever, I'm sure, iTunes. But I saw this on Shay Shah, and I thought that could be a very unique genetic mix. And so my goal was to get some genetic material from these bears, and they vary in size. A lot of them are not that big, but there are a few that are truly monumental. And then with 3 that we were chasing, although in the doco we say it's just 1, like we knew what we were doing. We were just hoping for any one of the 3. That's the truth. And we just used the general name Tlingit. Think of the bears, in terms of their culture, think of the bears as being half human and being magical creatures. And they acknowledge them with great reverence. So whenever you see a bear, if it's a male, you call him grandfather, and if it's a female, you call him grandmother, unless they're a cub, and then it's little brother, little sister. So we were looking for this gigantic light furred bear, which is not very common there. You get dark brown, you get what we call silver tips, which have that classic grizzly bear V around their neck in pale fur. But anyway, we're looking for grandfather, and we found him in the end, and we got fur, and we sent it over from several locations and some other large bears too, and sent that over to oh God, what's her name at University of New York in Buffalo. I'm now embarrassed. Anyway, she's the #1 bear geneticist on the planet. And what came back from that, spoiler alert if you wanted to watch the doco, but the information is that as we suspected, they were a hybrid species of brown bears and polar bears from the last ice age. That whole area, which we call Beringia, there was a giant ice bridge across from Russia to North America. And then there was what was called a refugia, which is a temperate area that animals could continue to live in. So you had cave bears and all sorts of giant megafauna lost to time, muskox and things that continue to live. And then polar bears came from these brown bears. But these polar bears, even before then, the polar bears and these ancient brown bears 20,000 years ago mated and produced these hybridized bears. So you can see why they're a little bit different. And then, of course, as the ice melted, the polar bears moved further north, bears moved further to the east. And these giant bears were on these little tiny, endemic pockets on these what was once beautiful rolling plains of grasslands, now was arboreal forests and gigantic mountains carved up by the glaciers. So it was just really fascinating. But Charlotte Lindquist, thank you, Charlotte Lindquist was the professor we took them to. But she said, and we said, what about giant American short-faced bear? Is there a possibility that is part of this genetic mix? And she said, well, I can't say for certain, which is a little bit heartbreaking, for 2 reasons. One, and this is important, is that we don't have any genetic material to compare it to. We don't have any DNA from a giant American short-faced bear. So that was a blow. But the other thing is that we are now gathering, I say we, I mean other people, better looking, slim-tipped, pleasant people, not like me. In Mexico, we're getting environmental DNA. In a cave, they found a Bactocimidas and trying to put the genome together. And so we're hoping at some point we'll get that and we'll be able to compare it to. But at the moment, we have nothing to compare it to. But she said, here's the thing. There is an anomaly in the genetics. I do think a 3rd species involved. So we can't with any credibility claim that it's a mix of ancient brown bear, ancient polar bear, and giant American short-faced bear. But we do know that it's 2 of those animals and an anomaly, which to me was a very satisfying conclusion. Very special place. You're part of a living history of the Tlingit people that is truly fascinating and beautiful. So that's been very, very special. And as I said, my wish list there is to one day we'll be able to compare the DNA to the short-faced bear and find that it does or it doesn't. At least we'll know what this 3rd animal is. But I will say, I do have a favorite mammal that I've never seen. And if you too have seen it, I will hate you with all the power of my mighty bosom. And that is the ribbon seal. I have been up in the Bering Sea area so many times and I've never seen one. Have you seen the most beautiful seal in the world.
Bradley, you have chosen the one mammal that John Hall has not actually seen, right?
Good.
And I certainly have not. No, but gosh, that is an animal that is incredibly high on my must go and find list. And
absolutely,
occasionally, John, wasn't this the case that one of them would like just make its way down to Seattle or somewhere?
There was one on a boat ramp in Seattle for a few days.
No, there
about
wasn't.
10 years ago. Yeah, but
why would it come so far south? Oh, because the ice melting, the water's cold. Yeah,
lost just a vagrant, I think. And a stunning picture of one in Alaska I saw recently. But I'm not sure when it's from. But the Sea of Okhotsk is the only reliable place for those, and it's like a 3-week trip.
So the one in Seattle, you're saying it actually came to shore, or because I mean,
it was on a boat ramp. Yeah, it was just
But see,
the jetty. Yeah.
But see, that's aberrant behavior, because that's what makes them so hard to find. Is they are, purely an open water seal, and they get onto ice and things like that, but they never come to shore. So that's an anomaly of a sick animal, and you get lucky, or whatever the case is. He's battered by a storm. But that's the thing. You've got to be at the right place, the right time for a few seconds, because of course, as soon as it sees you, unlike some of the big predatory seals, I remember being in Antarctica, and the leopard seals, they just don't give a damn. It's so huge. I mean, this is like 2 or 3, lions in a sleeping bag connected. I mean, these are giant, and they just don't care. But all the other seals, the Weddills and so on that I saw, they're off. See you later. And all that we have in Tasmania, they don't hang around the sea lions when you're doing things. Even the giant Stella's sea lion that we get up in Kutsnawu, I mean, they're huge. They don't hang around once you get there. But ribbon seals, I mean, these guys, gone. So to me, it's the most elusive, it's the most beautiful pinniped that's ever existed, in my opinion. And that is the biggest, that's the top of my wish list. I would just do anything to see one of those in the wild.
So, Bradley, you've talked about, I think, sticking your finger up the genitals of it was a crab, right? And having been ejaculated into by a grey-headed flying fox. So we've talked about some sort of sexual habits of animals, and that ties in nicely to the show that's premiering tomorrow in our time as we're recording this on Peacock. And there's been a bit of backlash, I understand, which is quite amusing. Would you like to talk about that with Queer Planet?
It's very amusing. Ed Watkins from the UK, really great wildlife documentary director from Plimsoll. I think he's back with the BBC now. Anyway, he invited me. I begged to be on this documentary called Queer Planet about sexual diversity in nature. And it's such a incredibly fascinating subject that never gets discussed. I'm not sure because of particular cultural and religious lenses that people see the world. But the truth is, we were taught about the birds and the bees by people who knew nothing about birds and less about bees. And it's to me, any person who's intelligent enough to be curious about the natural world should be interested in this subject. And this documentary, it's a family-friendly, it's fun, it's fascinating showcase of sexual diversity. Now, here in America, for those that don't know, there is an insane subclass called Christian conservatives. They are, from my experience, and I was raised by Christian parents and baptized and took religious studies for many years. They are not Christians. They are just, as John Cleese would say, what awful people. They really are quite hideous. Anyway, they have this sort of scaremongering, fear-mongering media outlets. Some of them are very, very big. And the documentary hasn't even been released. And some of these absolute nutters, Alex Jones, someone called Tommy Lara, and a few others, have attacked us, that we're trying to brainwash people into normalized deviant behaviors so that people will raise their children to be deviants or whatever it is. I mean, it's complete. You don't watch a film about dung beetles and go, oh, I've got to swaddle my child in antelope feces immediately. It's absolutely the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But they have come after us in a big way, which is great, Many more people will start watching Queer Planet and be delighted. And as you mentioned, it does start streaming on Peacock, which is an NBC channel here in America from tomorrow. And so it was just hilarious to be attacked and get all this free press about what deviants we are. But it's just facts, mate. It's just the facts. And people just have no idea. Let me give you some of the numbers, okay? I think it's 5% of all species, 1/3 of all species, excluding insects, are intersex. They have male and female genitals. Okay, we obviously in biology we don't talk about males and females about genitals or how they behave. We don't care. You either, if you produce eggs, you're a female. If you produce sperm, you're a male, and that's all we care about. The majority of all male species don't have a penis. Okay, the majority. Then there are those like the echidna that has 4 penises. The majority of females don't necessarily have what you would describe as a vagina, but then we have marsupials with 3 vaginas. We have females like the Brazilian barklaus that has a fabulous penis. We have all sorts of extraordinary things. The way that animals copulate, whether it be whether they have sex for pleasure and for relationships within a group or to reproduce, is astonishing. It's a kaleidoscopic Kama Sutra. And these are just how the world works. And it should astound and delight any normal person to get a sense of the fact that we are an anomaly. Because of society and culture, we're an anomaly. We're not saying that you should participate or emulate animal sexual behaviors. To be perfectly honest, none of us have the stamina or the lower back strength to take part in a bonobo orgy anyway. So it's just a really interesting show. Cover a variety of species, mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles. We even get into plants and fungi. It is a fabulous documentary. It's funny, but at the same time, it's majestic. It's not a joke. This is a window into a hidden world to explain how life on Earth has been sustained. And if you have a problem with that, then the problem is the guy in the mirror, because this is something that will in no way threaten a normal, confident person. In no way. I mean, it's just fabulous the way it works. Even what you'd call straight creatures are astonishingly weird. Think about barnacles. Okay, barnacles have the largest penis relative to body size of any species, period. It's about 40 times body length. Okay, that's impressive. I mean, a lot of people talk about the big animals, like whales with their 10-foot penises, 12-foot penises in the blue whale, and the southern right whale, which has 1,100 pound, what's that? 400 kilos, not quite, testicles. Okay, that's about 11 Kanye West per testicle. And everyone talks about these big things, but the barnacle, 40 times body length, it does a thing called sperm casting. That sounds great when you're speaking to a biologist, but here's what sperm casting really means. It's basically like masturbating into a hurricane and hoping for the best. And it works. It works every time. So for me, I'm very proud to be part of this project. We talked about sexual diversity on my animated show on Netflix, which you can watch anywhere in the world right now, called Adventure Bees, which is semi-autobiographical and about my wildlife projects and my military background and the various things I've been involved in and got injured. But this was an opportunity to do a pure product, to just focus on the extraordinary, the surprising, and the majestic ways that animals have sexual relations in order to produce offspring or not. And it was so delightful and surprising. I'm a laugher, not a crier when it comes to criticism. I shouldn't have been surprised they attacked us even before it had come out. It makes me laugh. I hope it brings a lot of people to it, because I would be so sad if someone didn't watch this documentary because of the misinformation and fear-mongering of these idiots. But it's a Queer Planet. It's a really great show. I did it for nothing. I just wanted to be part of a project that would showcase the extraordinary aspects of the wild world that, for reasons that escape me, aren't in the mainstream curriculum. I promise you watch this show, you'll be delighted, and you'll come away with a sense of awe and reverence for what you see. And as I've said many times, one of the most fundamental truths I've learned about nature is that there is nothing in this world that is beautiful, that is also not ugly at some level. And there is nothing that is ugly that is also not beautiful. And it's up to us to see the beauty in it all. And that's what Queer Planet's about.
Yes, and of course, you've got things like the fish that start off as males and turn into females.
Transgenderism is a real thing. There are so many species that do it. That's exactly right.
Yeah. And can people watch this if they're not in the US and they don't have access to Peacock?
I think you can watch it on Sky in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is the US premiere here tomorrow night. I think you get a VPN, and don't ask me. I don't know how to do any technical stuff. As I said, I punch crocodiles in the face, I write books, and I disarm landmines. That's all I do. So if you get a VPN, you can watch it from anywhere in the world. You look for Queer Planet online, Queer Planet on Peacock, and they can see an article straight away. It'll show you how to connect the VPN, so you can watch from anywhere in the world. Not for free. You have to buy some sort of small access. It's a few dollars American. So I don't know, 8,000 Australian dollars and half a pound. But the point is that you know, it's everywhere, but it's primarily, this is the North American premiere. I do know you can get it in the UK as well. It's a great show, and yeah, there are so many aspects of it that will surprise people. You know, you'll look at nature differently. Everything you see that's alive has its own unique story about how it survives and how it stays healthy and how it procreates. You will not look at nature the same way again. You'll have a greater sense of awe.
Yeah,
For sure. Well, I'm going to watch it. That sounds absolutely fascinating. And talking of unique stories, Bradley, what is more unique than your story? Thank you so much for sharing those wonderful anecdotes, for the your journey from a small kid looking at hedgehogs under the snows of Bridgend to working with, maybe discovering, you know, the lineage of short-faced giant bear. I don't even know this bear, it's extinct, so I haven't been to look for the bear in Alaska. And also your wonderful way with words, from the Kanye West units of testicular measurement to the masturbating priest in a sauna color scale. I'm going to never look at wakaris in the same way again. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
It's my pleasure, John and Charles. It's nice to finally track you both down, and a privilege to be on your podcast. Hello to all the listeners who enjoy you, and thank you for being great ambassadors of wild life and wild places. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And to be honest, it's been a highly entertaining discussion. And frankly, the feeling I'm coming away with is that I'm actually surprised that you're still here with us. But I'm very glad that you are, and really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
You've been listening to Mammal Watching with Charles Foley and John Hall. You can find other episodes at mammalwatching.com/podcast.